Hello crafty friends, it's Alicia here with another project for Tailored Expressions. Today I'll be showing you how to make an all-occasion card set inspired by fall colors and using the brand new Petal Prints card making kit. This set will be perfect to build up your own card stash or to give away as a gift. Heather has once again worked her magic and designed another fabulous kit. This kit includes the Petal Print stamp and stencil combo and a coordinating die set that cuts out the Petal Print stamp and the Petal Prints pattern stamp. And to help you with the message on the inside, or the front if you wish, you get the Insider's Petal Print with 5 different greetings. From the kit today, I'll be using the Petal Print stamp and stencil combo along with the Petal Prints pattern stamp set. For the main decoration on the cards, I will be doing some stenciling, and I chose kind of a fall rainbow color palette. I got out honey, pumpkin, blue corn, mulled wine, and sweet basil, and I got out coordinating blending brushes. I'll be using those same inks for stamping and doing some stamping and heat embossing. So I brought in my Versamark ink pad and TE Fine Gold Detail Embossing Powder. And to help me stamp, I got out the anti-static powder tool, the Just Press tool, and the MISTI so I can just set it up once and stamp it 10 times. The cardstocks I'll be using today are toffee for my card bases, buttercream frosting for my stenciling panels and to go on the inside, and then for my accent pieces I got out pumpkin, honey, blue corn, and mulled wine. Since I haven't gotten the chance to use my foil magic shims, I thought on today's card I would make some foiled sentiments. So I pulled out my Foil It on Occasions and coordinating dies, and I'll be foiling that with gold deco foil. For die cutting, I grabbed A2 Layer Stacklets and the Frame and Frame 3 cutting plate. And finally, for my adhesives, I will be using the 1/16 inch thick foam tape and Barely Art liquid glue. Let's get crafty! I'm going to get started by bringing in 5 pieces of buttercream frosting, and I will be using the third from the largest die in the A2 layer stacklet and cutting 4 from each piece. This gets me 10 pieces for stenciling on the front and 10 pieces to go on the inside. Next, using the second from largest die from the Frame and Frame 3 set, I die cut 10 total frames using mulled wine, blue corn, pumpkin, and honey. Make sure to keep those insides because those will come in handy later for other projects. Now it's time to do some stamping. I brought in 10 of those buttercream frosting pieces and the Petal Print stamp set. Since these are red rubber stamps, I removed the pad from the MISTI, and because I want my stamp to hang off the lower left-hand corner of each piece, I will be aligning these in the upper right-hand corner of the MISTI before stamping each time. Now make sure when you're heat embossing that you have your anti-static powder tool to prep your cardstock, and then I'm going to ink up that stamp nice and juicy with the Versamark ink and stamp that. Now you can't see it on camera because it is a very light, almost clear ink, but when you pour the powder over it, the image starts showing up as it falls down that. I tapped my excess off over this anti-static funnel tray. I like to use this, it has that nice cap on the end, so when you're ready to dump it back into your jar later, it's super easy. Once that stamp is set up in the MISTI, it's easy to stamp my remaining 9 pieces. Now this time I didn't pour the powder back into the tray between each one. I only poured it back in when my jar ran out, and I set all of these to the side to heat emboss them all at once. Now if you're worried your ink won't still be wet, you could definitely do 3 or 4 at a time and heat emboss in between. But it did work for me. You'll see here I have all 10 of mine lined up. In the upper left was the newest one that I had stamped and powdered, so I did start with the lower right. When I do heat embossing, I like to heat up the back a little first and then come to the front and quickly melt the powder. Every once in a while, I do stop and move my card around in the light just to make sure everything is melted and nice and shiny. Next up is the stenciling. This is a 3-piece stencil set. 2 are for the flowers and 1 is for the leaves, which we will set that and the sweet basil ink aside for later. For the flower stencils, you could use 2 different inks, but I'm going to show you how you can use a single ink for each stencil and still get some variation for the centers. To help with placement and to catch any stray ink, I'll be working on top of a grid paper placemat. To hold each of my stamped pieces in place, I brought in my Scotch tape runner and I added a little bit to the back and removed some of the tack with my fingers. Then each time I place one of my stenciled pieces, I'm going to put it in the lower right hand corner of that portrait box that's printed on the placemat. These stencils have an etched line where the stamped stem is at, so I had that help me get the placement correct on this first one, and I held that in place with some painter's tape hinges just so it's easy to pull that back and place a new one. I'll be making 10 total cards today, split between these 4 colors, and I'm going to start blending with the lightest ink, which is honey. But before I do start the stenciling, I brought in a pencil and marked the corners and some of the edges of where this first stencil went. That way, when later I go to place my second stencil, I can use those as starting points. Now I started off ink blending, trying to be careful of not going over the edge of the stencil, but I did decide to bring in some post-it tape, and that was definitely the right choice because later you'll see how dirty this got. I know that we all try to be careful, but if you have something to help you not get ink where you don't want it, I say go for it. Once I had a coverage I liked, it was easy to remove that first card and replace it with the second. Now, because I'm going to be using the same color for the flower centers, I did try to go with a lighter hand on this first layer. And make sure between each one, so you don't contaminate your ink pad or your blending brushes, to clean the stencil off as good as you can. The next color I brought in was pumpkin, and I used that same process for 2 of the card fronts. And then before I moved on to the blue corn and the mulled wine, I would clean the stencil in between each color. Once all of the card fronts had their first layer of color, I brought in stencil number 2 and started the same process for the flower centers. Now the tack on the back of each card was still a little bit sticky, so I placed those down and then I started to place my stencil using those pencil guidelines I had created. Now you might find that you need to adjust it just a little bit, but when you have it in the correct place, you'll put your hinges back on and get those outside areas covered up with the label tape. Now for this layer, I did do a little bit heavier hand. I just wanted to make sure when I was done and removed the stencil that you could tell a difference between the center and the outside of the flower. Once again, I used the same process for all 10 card fronts, making sure to clean well between each of the colors, and then it was time to move on to the sweet basil for the leaf layer. I got my first card front set up and got the stencil in place, and then this process is basically the same for the leaves, except I don't have to clean anything between colors. Now for my leaves, I did just use that single color sweet basil, but if you wanted to add some shading, you could definitely do that with either markers or a darker colored ink. Now the first card has all of the ink blending done. I love how this kind of looks like a sunflower. And if you notice that your embossing might not be as shiny as you think, you could always bring in a paper towel or a soft cloth to remove any ink that is sitting on top of the embossing powder. Now make sure if you have just ink blended like I did on those green leaves to be extra careful in that area. I finished the rest of the ink blending off camera and decorated the inside cards using the Petal Prints pattern stamp set. I also cut, scored, and folded 5 pieces of toffee cardstock for my card bases. To start putting my cards together, I used the Scotch permanent tape runner, placing the stenciled piece on the front of the card and the stamped piece on the inside. I did make sure that whatever color the flowers were on the front was the same as the decoration on the inside. This just adds a little extra interest. Let me know in the comment section below if you like to decorate the inside of your cards as well. After I finished adhering all those pieces, I brought in my Barely Art liquid glue and started adding the frames. Whatever color I had ink blended was the frame that I would put on the card front, and because I did use that liquid glue, it gave me a little bit of wiggle room to move the frame around and get it nice and centered. Now once all of those were done, it was time to get a sentiment added. For this, once again, I'm going to be foiling my sentiments and trying out the new Foil Magic Shim, and let me tell you, it worked beautifully. Now off camera, I die cut those with the coordinating dies and added that thin foam tape to the back. Once the sentiments were in place, and to finish off the cards, I added some gold drip drops, 5 to each of the card fronts, using the Barely Art glue and picking everything up with Embelly Jelly. I like how this brought out a little bit more of that gold embossing and foiling and added some more shine. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated, and if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you are the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.